Hello, Maria. Welcome, everybody. Maria Sitzoglou, can you hear us? Can you open your
Yes,
microphone?
hello. Hello, I'm sorry for this technical detail. So, hello from the
We
virtual...
can hear Maria.
Can you hear me?
Perfect. Welcome.
Hello. Hello, and I'm sorry for that small delay. Hello from the virtual world of Zoom. So happy to be able to join you, at least this way.
Just a minute, Maria, because this sounds great. Go on.
Perfect. So from the Zoom world, I would like also to welcome you to this first plenary session of our conference and the final session of the day, of the first day. We're delighted to have with us women leaders from 3 metropolitan cities, Athens, Vienna, and Vancouver, who will be sharing with us insights and takeaways from their wealthy experience from both their cities and other projects at the global scale as well. So our speakers today will be touching upon the major topics that will be further discussed during this 3-day conference. And those topics are climate change adaptation and citizens' participation, as well as all the challenges that city administrations might encounter when conducting participatory processes. At the same time, being leaders and also being human, I think that this discussion tonight will be pivoting around equality and the gender dimension in shaping urban policies and influencing the decision making. Also inclusiveness, and of course, how can we actually integrate all the outcomes that we receive from participatory processes into inclusive policy making. So after the discussion among the panelists, we will have time for a Q&A session for questions received both from the people who are joining us on site at Serafio, but as well joining us online. And with no further delay, I would like to introduce you to our panelists that we're so pleased to have here today. So from Athens, we have Eleni, Lenio, Myrivili, who is the advisor to the mayor of Athens on urban resilience and sustainability. From Vienna, we have Maria Vassilakou, who is the former vice mayor of the city of Vienna and a member of the EU Horizon Mission Experts Board on climate neutral and smart cities. And from Vancouver, we have Andrea Reimer, who is academic and strategic advisor to governments and organizations and a former member of the Vancouver City Council. Now, I would like to ask our panelists to briefly introduce the work they currently are focusing on. And then Lenio, the floor is yours to kick off this very interesting discussion that we have been looking forward to. Thank you very much.
So we
Lenio,
can take the masks off. Hello, thank you, Maria, for introducing us. I should say that all three of us are former deputy mayors, which is what kind of brought us together. It didn't really bring us together, but we had a lot of things to chat about when we met. And I would like to start by giving the floor to Andrea, who came here from further away, from Vancouver, to tell us a little bit about yourself and about your work up to now, just like a little introduction.
Sure. So thank you, Lenio. It's so great to be here with you and Maria and Eleni in Athens. Such an incredible journey to make here. So my name is Andrea Reimer. I was elected to government in Vancouver for 4 terms, so a total of 13 years, 1 on the Board of Education and then 3 on the City Council. I was the first person elected in Canada for the Green Party when I was elected to the school board, so that gives you some idea of my politics. I went on to join a bigger coalition party, but it was very committed to green action. So when I ran for City Council, in 2008, it was with the mayor who was 100% committed to taking every action that we could on greening Vancouver. So we started this program called The Greenest City, and the idea was that we would be the greenest city in the world by the year 2020. So now it's 2021. Maybe we can have a talk about that and the challenge in government of setting aspirational targets. But so I was the lead on that. I did a lot of work on reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, which is a very big issue in Canada. I did a lot of work on social issues. Also, Vancouver is on the Pacific side of Canada. It's not in the French-speaking part. Everyone asks me, are you from the French-speaking part? I'm not. But it is a very multicultural city. So about half of our residents were not born in Canada. And are visible minorities. About 30% of our residents live below what we call the poverty line. So while there's a lot of wealth in Vancouver, there's also a lot of poverty, and these are issues that the City Council deals with. So I decided to leave government in 2018, partially because I thought 4 terms is enough for any human to be in government, and it's enough for a government to have someone there for 4 terms. But also, I just felt there was a crisis in democracy, and that it may seem ironic, but that it would be better served to get out of the middle of it and spend some time exploring what I could bring from my experience. So that's what I do now. I teach at a university, and I also do strategic advice for governments and public sector institutions.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah.
And kind of similar background, Maria, not exactly, but tell us a little bit about your journey with politics and after.
Good evening, everybody. I would say, as my name most probably lets you suspect, I'm of Greek origin. I was born and grew up in Greece. I left for Austria after finishing school in order to study there, and I stayed. At some point, I joined the Green Party, which I mean the ecological party of Austria and Vienna. Actually, originally arriving from the anti-racism movement and human rights. But of course, once I was there, I discovered political ecology and I stayed for life. Now, 96, I was the first time elected as a city councillor and member of the Viennese parliament. And then one thing led to the other. So at some point, I became the chief candidate, so the mayor candidate of the Green Party in Vienna. And I also ran 4 times as chief candidate for elections. And 2010, we joined the Social Democratic Party in Vienna and formed a coalition, so I became vice mayor. I stayed vice mayor for about approximately 10 years. And what I should also say is that since Vienna is a city and a state at the same time within the Austrian Federation, it is quite wealthy, prosperous. So you have a budget and you have also decision powers. So we did a lot. Within government, I was responsible for urban planning and urban development, climate protection, energy planning, mobility planning, and citizen involvement. So it's a lot about the things that we will be talking about tonight. We pressed for a very ambitious agenda, and at some point, pretty much like Andrea, I found this is about enough. 25 years in politics is enough altogether, and it's about time I change perspectives. And so I stepped out of politics 2019, and pretty much like Andrea, I founded my own company in this case, and I'm giving strategic advice predominantly to cities worldwide, but also national governments, NGOs sometimes, development banks, and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Maria. That's very nice. So, so I should say a few words about myself. I started by being a professor. I studied anthropology and I became a professor of anthropology and cultural theory. And then I also joined the Green Party at some point and became very involved in Green Party politics. And then I actually left the Green Party about 4 or 5 or maybe 6 years into it, and decided that I was interested in city politics because I thought maybe cities are better than parties to work in. And indeed, cities are much more interesting than political parties to be part of. And I got elected in 2014 in the for the city of Athens. And I got elected with a green agenda. And I became the first chief resilient officer of Athens. And I created the Office of Resilience and Sustainability and the strategy for Athens, for the resilience strategy for Athens, and then eventually the deputy mayor of urban nature, urban resilience, and climate adaptation. And then my term was finished, and I now I'm an advisor. The new mayor kept me as an advisor for issues like climate change and urban adaptation. And I'm also working for the Adrian Arston Rockefeller Resilience Center as an advisor there. And through the collaboration of these two, of City of Athens and them, I also became the chief heat officer for Athens, which basically means that I have to try to focus on issues of heat and how to deal with how to make the city safer and cooler for the rising temperatures and climate change. So, so I thought we would start a discussion between us in the themes that Maria Sitzoglou kind of mentioned before. And I thought just to spark the discussion, we could start with the word adaptation and ask you maybe what comes to mind, like when you hear the word adaptation, what comes to mind, or like is there an episode, or is it something that you can tell us about adaptation? So Andrea, would you like to begin?
Yeah, well, so I know the theme is climate adaptation, but I was thinking as we were giving our introductions that we're almost like the same person in these like very different contexts and geographies, like the Green Party and the deputy mayor and I'm guessing a lot of our experiences were very similar. But I think, I mean, I can talk a bit about climate adaptation, but I'd also love to explore this concept of how much we three had to adapt to make it work in government, right? Because it's not an accident that we're three women who were deputy mayors for three men who were mayors, right? So, and this is how the world kind of works, and we're expected to kind of, they're not meeting us halfway, right? It's our job to figure out how to adapt. You know, if they're there, how to make this giant bridge happen between the communities we're there to represent and this sort of typical kind of politics, right? So that's an interesting discussion. Maybe we can explore a bit. When we were talking about climate adaptation before the event, I was saying to Lenio that, so we had done this big agenda to be the greenest city in the world. It had 10 big policy areas: climate, water, green jobs, food, I mean, you name it. And then 17 targets, and then within that, like hundreds of projects and initiatives. And climate adaptation was one of them. So 4 years into this program, we do up this climate adaptation strategy. I had done thousands of media interviews, like many on bike lanes, on composting, on every new project we did. And every time they would come very aggressive and be like, because this was like 2008, 2009, like these things were not, there was no Greta Thunberg running around talking about the crisis, you know? People were like, what are these crazy people doing, thinking that they're responding to a crisis that we don't see. And so we do this climate adaptation strategy, and I get all, you know, pumped up to go talk to the media, and the media says to me, this guy who's interviewing me, he says, it's not quite how he said it, but it's how I heard it. He's like, this is the smartest policy I have ever seen a government do. Like, you've thought ahead and you're thinking about the future and you're planning for it. How come you're so smart? And I was so kind of surprised by this that I actually took the sort of opposite position of being like, well, it's not that good. Like, it's because it was so unusual to see this response. And it really made me realize, after all these years of working on climate in government for 4, but you know, many years before that, I started working on climate in 1996, really, that we'd kind of been missing this opportunity to talk to people about what they perceive about climate, which is the weather, right? And that's what was sort of drawing him
Right.
in.
Which is very interesting because that's the whole like conundrum of heat, which is weird because we've been talking about global warming for such a long time, and somehow nobody has been talking about heat in cities and people and all that. But Maria, what comes to mind about adaptation?
Well, first, let me also add to what Andrea started with. When I work together with cities, I always try to get to meet the vice mayor as soon as possible, because no hard feelings towards mayors, but it's normally the vice mayors that do the job.
Do the work. Yeah.
So they have to really work, and they're the people that you have to work closely with. And it's decisive to what is being implemented in a city normally. But returning to adaptation, what comes to my mind is that back in 2010, this was not an issue in Vienna, or not so much. I mean, it is a city that did not experience summer heat until some years ago. And so back then, whatever we tried to do in terms of adaptation was an issue. It was a big issue, and it was huge controversy. And I mean, if there's one place on earth that back then you would meet people who don't want to have trees in their streets, this is Vienna.
Why?
Why? Because they cost parking slots
Yeah,
for cars.
of course.
So in Vienna, the currency used to be not euro, it was parking slots. And whatever you said you want to do, the question would be how many parking slots does it cost? So we went through huge controversy, and it was pretty much like, what is this crazy woman talking about, and who needs it? And in the meantime, though, Vienna is experiencing summer heat, and is projected to be one of the 3 cities in Europe that will have biggest trouble with summer heat. It's Athens, Milan, and Vienna.
But what's the phenomena that creates that?
I couldn't tell you really.
Sorry.
I couldn't tell you why Vienna specifically. It's just that we know it.
Interesting.
And
Did you have other, sorry to interrupt you, but did you have other climate issues that you needed to adapt to, like intense rain or flooding, or not really?
we have had climate incidents, we have flooding incidents in Austria, but not so much in Vienna. In Vienna, we had a very specific case that happened a couple of years ago, where within half an hour or something, a street turned into a river.
Yeah, the flash
But
floods.
it was just this once and never again. What is an issue, though, to make a long story short, is summer heat. Suddenly we have in Vienna several nights where at night the temperature in summer is 30 degrees or even 35 degrees, which is considered to be a tropical night.
Wow.
So suddenly everybody realized what it means. And within 10 years, things have changed dramatically. And the bad thing about myself, so this is what comes to mind personally when I hear about adaptation, is that I went through the entire controversy. Just to give you an example, we introduced parking space management in the outer parts of town, and I was hated for it like hell. And it was about space. So it was about space for greeting, space for other uses, right? So I went through it.
For bicycles?
Yes, bicycle lanes as well. But believe me, it was also mostly about trees. And it was also space for community uses. We'll be talking about participation later. But I went through it, I stepped out of politics, and then, others came, and it was not an issue anymore. You get the applause. Yeah. So
I had the same experience where now everyone's like, why didn't we do more of this or that, when it was like a world war before over these issues.
But that is, I think, the fate of the pioneer generation. And it's still, it's a very nice feeling when I'm in Vienna to see what is happening right now. And just the last 2 weeks actually, they have converted Central Street into shared space, and they have put 20-year-old trees in it. And it's just an example of how things have changed.
So Vienna was, would you say that it had the traffic issues as much as in Athens when you first kind of got there? This whole idea of the parking spot that was such a big, that had such great value, meant that it was such a strongly kind of car-driven city as it is in Athens today, or no?
Well, I would say Vienna is of course not comparable to Athens. Okay, Athens is a tragical place when it comes to private car use. Also because people have, many parts of Athens actually no alternative practically. I mean, I have, in the last year I spent time in Athens, I have a flat in Varkisa. Don't ask me. How do I get away from Varkisa, okay? So it's very different. Vienna has excellent public transport, but in Vienna, it's a totally different perception of what is a traffic jam. So in Vienna, 3 cars are a traffic jam. And people get horribly stressed and extremely upset and frustrated when somebody is trying to, or was, once again, things are changing very rapidly right now, but was trying to reduce streets to do pedestrianization or shared space, any kind of traffic calming, you would have immediately the discussion that you are producing traffic jams, which you very much know all very well from Athens, but from all over the world. And I think that it has to do still a lot with the mindset of people feeling that cars are freedom and status, and then do not forget that the German-speaking area love cars because they're producing them.
Right.
And in the end, I always tell people, you know, if you feel like your car is a member of your family, then at least don't let it be your youngest child, you know, let it be your mother-in-law. You're well advised to have a good, you know, relationship to her, and you may like her and she may like you as well, and everything's fine, but you would never let her dominate your life. And this is actually what it is about.
Interesting. I mean, one of my reflections on policy, particularly green policy, is that when you have it up in the air, so, you know, we had this policy to be the greenest city in the world, and not everyone agreed with it, but, you know, our bigger problem was that we're Canadian, and everyone was like, why would we be the best at something, right? Like, this was the harder psychological barrier, but once people bought into it, they were like, yes, we want to be the greenest city. So you say, okay, well, to be the greenest city, it's not it's not a subjective standard. You just look at all the cities in the world and you do a little better than them, right? And so people would say, yes, we want to do all these things. We want to cut emissions by this. We want to cut garbage. We want to cut water use, all these things. And this was fine at a conceptual level, but the minute it touches the ground, it's a bike lane, it's a tree in a parking spot, it's something that like takes up land space, it became a huge battle. But as long as it was conceptual, so the adaptation strategies were not entirely, but people in their minds thought of them as more conceptual aspirations, it was totally fine. So compost, when we brought that in, it was like a $200 million, it was a change, it was the biggest change in waste management in 180 years of doing waste management in cities. And people were like, well, why don't I have this yet, right? They were very excited about it, but 1 kilometer of bike lane, I'm not kidding, the first bike lane we built was 1 kilometer on a bridge, so there's no adjacent retail, like there's no impact on anyone other than a few cars. We have like 5 helicopters in Vancouver that do the news, and they were all hovering the day it opened, like waiting for Armageddon to happen or something. Anyway, so there's something about the land, right, and this battle inch by inch in the city that is quite profound. And I mean, it comes in housing and other issues as well, but I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of participation, because some people feel they have a greater right to the land than others, right? If you're a renter or if you're experiencing homelessness or other things, your ability to participate in a debate that's about land is much lower than those people who actually own a piece of this city.
Right. And I think that it's also a lot to do with land is a limited edition in cities. So reallocating land for other uses is most probably one of the most controversial things that you can do.
Yeah, and in this city, it's crazy because it's an extremely densely built city. It's the second more densely inhabited and densely built city in Europe. In parts of it, I think the first one is Paris, and the issues of trying to change uses and to actually change uses in the public space are incredibly difficult.
But I think then when we talk about adaptation, we're talking about adapting the physical environment to a changing climate.
Right.
But it's as much as social adaptation. Like, how do you convince people that maybe that use of that square meter is better put to some change, right? And I think the engineers, it's not so, well, okay, I'm sure every engineer that's listening is like, she doesn't understand me, but it's not that difficult to figure out how to adapt the engineering system. I think figuring out how to adapt the social system is where we haven't really done as much work.
You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure.
About adapting the social system? And also, and about the adaptation, the first adaptation to the mayors that you were talking about. Because I think, I mean, for just to kind of, what jumps into my mind when I hear you say this, and I'll give you back the floor, is the incredible, I think one of the most challenging things is to actually change the way that the people that are designing and that the people that are implementing initiatives in a city, the whole kind of frame of mind towards understanding how climate, how the city can adapt to climate is a really big challenge. So this whole idea of teaching an old dog new tricks is one of the really hard issues, especially when it comes to infrastructure, because people kind of really know how to do things and they know how to make money out of things, and everything is kind of more or less set. And then if you start asking them to really change the way that they deal with flooding, for example, in a street, or they deal with heat in a neighborhood, and to change the way they understand the environment, that's a really big issue. But you weren't talking about that. You were talking about social adaptation.
No, that's what I'm thinking of for
Ah,
social.
okay.
Like, so both the personal social orientation to the world, as well as the broader social adaptation that we're asking people to make. So this idea of seeing yourself as an autonomous car driver, like, sorry, I feel like I just messed that up with autonomous cars, but like someone who, when they get in their car, has complete autonomy, versus someone who, when they get on the transit system, suddenly is captive to the government's decision about when this train runs and how it matches other things. That's a big social shift, right? In North America, I mean, that's the whole point of North America, right? Was like, we get to do what we want, when we want, on private cars, on private land, all these things, right? So it's a big question you're asking people to put to themselves.
You know, that totally brings to my mind, but again, we would be jumping to another issue.
Okay.
This very interesting discussion that I heard a little while ago, which has to do with infrastructure, again, going back to infrastructure and energy. So with the grid, like if you start kind of having a more and more decentralized system of energy, and you don't kind of it's not very clear like how this would work and who would be providing the grid and how the grid would work. And if we're going towards a post kind of grid situation where the grid is not the public or the national government that provides the grid, or the private sector that provides the grid, but not the production or the consumption, which is beyond the grid, it becomes kind of course, complex. And then also anyway, but that's that's another. But it kind of, you just reminded me of this kind of issue of who. Anyway, go, Maria. What did you want to say?
Yes,
Sorry.
you know what jumps into my mind? It's like one thought that I've had right now is that adaptation could be the other side of the coin of innovation.
Interesting.
Because we're talking a lot about innovation, and there are, of course, also bottom-up innovative processes, but let's be honest, 70% of the times innovation is quite a top-down approach, because it has a lot to do with resources, research, businesses, somebody
Taking a
there proclaiming that we have to move in this or that direction, whereas society as a whole is asked to adapt, in a sense, to innovative processes.
Yes.
So this was the first thing that came to my mind while you were speaking. The second thing that came to my mind is, I think when it comes to infrastructures, it's a lot about energy transformation, whereas when it comes to mobility and urban design in terms of public space and so on and so forth, it's less about infrastructures. I think it is about new systems, systemic innovation. So in the end, adapting to what we're talking about leads to demand responsive public transport services. And it is not a coincidence that the way to go is not necessarily from private car use to public transport. The way leads via actually demand responsive bus services or mobility as a service offers, right? Where and even car sharing. So it's about, in the first step, it's about stop owning a car. And then everything else, I think, within the next 10 to 15 years, one thing leads to the other. And so returning to Athens, for instance, I find that it's quite a pity that there's no car sharing here, right? There's also no bike sharing. There's no sharing, actually.
This maybe is a social adaptation that Greeks need to embrace.
Well, yes, but first, you have to create, on behalf of the city, the opportunity to use something. And my experience is the same thing was in Vienna when we started introducing bike sharing. And I should say, this is a funny story. It has a lot to do with what we're talking about today. We decided back in 2001, we were not yet in government, but we had talks at the beginning of the era, 2001 to 2005, and agreed with the governing party that we would be cooperating on some projects. And one of those projects was a green idea, and that was bike sharing. So what we did was we practically found an NGO that was interested in applying this, implementing this, and we bought 1,000 bikes and we just put them into the city, and that was that. So you did not have to pay for it. You did not have to do anything. You could just take it, you could just ride, and you could just leave it anywhere. And it was only that you were supposed not to lock it. That was the only thing that you were not supposed to be doing. Other than that, that was it. And everybody said, you're absolutely crazy. Nobody's going to use this because, I mean, we have cars and we have expensive cars, and whoever wants to do cycling has not only one, but perhaps 2 or 3 bicycles. And it was such a success. I mean, overnight it was introduced. One morning, we went out and of our front doors and the bikes were there. And for the next week, the entire city reminded me of a kindergarten, because you could see people with laughing faces on their bikes, cycling anywhere and laughing because it was such a crazy thing to do. And then after that, it was a complete failure but for other reasons, not because the people did not love it, but because we had, first of all, theft. So within a very short period of time, bikes started disappearing. And then we had vandalism also because it was for free. And a few months later, we stopped this and introduced the first proper commercial bike sharing system that has been introduced in a European city, which later on was reproduced in Sevilla and Paris and whatnot. And this was a success. And so what you see is that, of course, you have to create the possibility, the opportunity for people to use something, and you will see that whenever you offer something, it is taken up and used.
So in Athens, we did have initiatives for bike sharing or car sharing and all that kind of stuff. I remember I did a television documentary series and talked to several groups that were starting such initiatives. And they're probably still around, some of them, mostly by young people that have put them together. They were never, however, kind of supported or found some kind of institutional support. And I think these types of things sometimes, I mean, they can stay on an informal level and through just at an NGO level, but in order to actually make them a significant part of the city, then the city has to actually support it and to take it and promote it and give it the space in the streets to actually happen. And this hasn't happened yet in Athens. And it's high time and it should happen, but it's still very difficult for people to start conceptualizing, and people in power often, it's really hard to start conceptualizing this shift from your own car or public transportation to something that's in between, or starts kind of thinking of other forms of hybrid kind of systems. I think in Greece, and maybe it has to do with ideological and political issues too, the idea of something being the responsibility of the public sector, and then the idea that then there's the private sector, and that these are very separate and they really have significant mandates and significant kind of aspects. I think it also has to do with politics that doesn't want these two things to kind of mingle in strange ways, because also they're worried that, you know, the private sector is going to take on a lot of the what should be the public sector, which we've seen in a lot of cities, right? There's always the fear that of minimizing the power of the public sector by allowing different types of innovative private initiatives to take place. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but actually before you talk about that, I wanted to say something else. It's kind of interesting too, because initiatives in Athens that are bottom up, because we also talked from bottom up kind of innovation that we have seen in Athens too, are also things that they want to be very separate from the public sector. So even if the public sector, like the city, had tried to, for example, like something like a park that was basically, that started from squatting this area and people from the neighborhood taking on and creating a park, etc., etc. Things like that, initiatives like that, want to also keep their independence from institutions, worrying that the public sector might take over and will kind of not allow them to have the kind of radical aspect, or the kind of the innovative and more radical aspect to them. So that's kind of another interesting kind of aspect. I just thought I would throw it into the story, because it also has to do with participation and bottom-up initiatives as well, that for the cities, they are so important because they make the cities very much alive, and they create social connections and networks, and which during times of difficulty help people adapt to problems like climate issues. And we'll come back to that. But I think those things also often resist the links to institutions, even if institutions might be willing to do something without really kind of taking over. But anyway, so now I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you, but give me some.
But I think from 2,000 kilometers distance, let's put it this way, my perception is that PPP can bring you in jail in Greece.
Can
bring you very quickly in jail in Greece if you are from public administration. So there is a reluctance.
PPP is public-private partnerships.
Yeah,
For the
right?
people that don't
So
know, it's
there have
public-private
been
partnership.
very bad experiences in the past, which kind of explains at least parts of this reluctancy to embark in PPPs. At the same time, it may also serve as an excuse for not doing things. And at the same time, when a small company or an NGO plans to implement something, the processes of procurement in Greece are so complicated and take so long, and then there's so little money to get out of it, that perhaps I would myself also say, I'll just do it, I won't wait for that. But I think that the issue in Athens right now is you need infrastructures as well. Because what I said before, that in terms of mobility, we're switching away from infrastructures towards services. Yes, but the infrastructures are already there. But what you do in a city like Athens, where the infrastructure for cycling, example given, is not there. So what I have always advised is that Athens should do something that would be on a very small budget, but would have impact overnight practically, and would be done within, I don't know, a year's or 2 years' time. And this is to introduce cycling streets. Instead of building cycling lanes everywhere, which costs money and takes ages until it's done, one could create a basic cycling network by taking streets that are not so important, for central traffic, and converting them into cycling streets, which can be done quickly, easily, on a low budget, creates what you need in order to do cycling, a network, and then you can combine these streets with a greening network.
Yeah.
So you could actually say, since you've taken the cars out, more or less, okay, and you have created cycling streets, you need less space, and you can then start actually de-cementation and tree planting gradually. And then what you create is something like a green network throughout the entire city. And suddenly the world looks different. So I think this is the way to go here. But this is always like this. We're in the Muppet Show now, so we can say whatever we want from the balcony, and nobody listens.
But it's a good, so we talked about physical adaptation a bit and social adaptation, but I think it's such a good example of the need for political adaptation, right? And to adapt the politics, and maybe a good ramp into the participatory democracy discussion. So thinking about when you were talking about what you did with the bike share, and thank you for that story. I had no idea, it fills in so many gaps about how this innovation happened in the world that we've all benefited from, who've brought in bike sharing, but how so it's how government meets people where they're at already, rather than says, here's where I want you to be at, right? And I think this happens with infrastructure. So in Vancouver, one adaptation with heat that we did is like Vienna, we're not a very hot place. And then suddenly in 2009, we had a heat wave and one person died, which probably sounds like not such a big deal here in Athens, but it was quite a wake up for us. And we created this extreme heat strategy, and just this summer had a huge heat wave that killed about 500 people. They're still doing the methodology around that, but way too many. But this extreme heat strategy is what saved many people's lives. And so one of the things we did is it costs a lot of money to put water fountains in. It's like $35,000 per water fountain. So if you don't put them in the right place, you're really kind of wasting the money for these water fountains. So our engineers developed these temporary fountains, and they would tape them to the fire hydrants so that they had the water connection. But so people would have water during heat waves, but also they can measure the flow and tell which ones are in places that are getting high use, and then figure out how to put permanent water fountains in there, right? So it's like this, I think we often think of participatory democracy as things that happen in rooms like this, and I think it needs to happen in rooms like this, but that's also participatory democracy, right? When transit goes on strike, that's another kind of participatory democracy. So figuring out how to hear what people are saying and incorporate those messages into the political arena, rather than just assume that it's the political arena that's always creating the space for messages to happen.
But also sometimes going against what the people want.
The loud people, yes. The people who have time to show up at City Hall.
I'm thinking of cars. Yeah. No, I'm thinking of cars because it's really difficult, the fight with cars.
But you know, so in Vancouver, this bike lane war was sort of our big war. Vancouver's quite a small geographic city. It takes about 4 hours to walk from one side of the city to the other.
How many people?
About 1 million. So
like it's more or less like us, right? 700,000.
Yeah, we're at 700,000 at night, and by the middle of the day, it's over 1 million.
We are too. Yes,
yeah,
we have a lot of.
Right?
In the day, we have a lot of people using the city, but the residents that sleep at night, is a smaller number.
So when we did the bike lanes, what we found out is it's that 300,000 that show up every day that we're very upset about the bike lanes. But the people who sleep at night in the city, the residents, they were actually very supportive. The numbers were in 65, 70% of people supportive of the bike lanes, but on the talk shows and the Twitter and all these other things, it's the people driving into the city who are very upset.
That's very
right?
interesting.
So again, it's like, I'm not saying that those are the best ways for participation, but like really understanding these different avenues to be able to hear the messages of people.
And to find which are the constituencies that actually are not heard and might actually be the ones supporting the stuff that you're trying to envision in the city.
And I think the worst things are when, if you could hear those people and just change it a little bit, it would be really supportive, right? Because sometimes you have the best idea in the world, and then, you know, it's for people using it, maybe not quite the best idea. So it's figuring out how those connections get made as well, in a way that you can hear what people are saying and really authentically incorporate it.
Maria would like to jump in and ask some questions. So please, our tech support to help Maria Sitzoglou open her microphone. Maria?
Yeah, hi.
Sorry to interrupt.
And I think I was just wondering that it's, on the one hand, it's fascinating how many similarities we find among those three cities, where in an initial idea you might think that they're so different, like a Mediterranean, South Europe city, a Northern European city, and then Canada, Vancouver. So I was wondering if you can share a little bit more about participation and about the minorities. Andrea, you mentioned about minorities in the beginning in your introduction, and how, like, methods or like lessons learned from your previous experience, how you managed to reach out to people who might not understand the concept, not understand the language, or not have access to specific tools or events that are about participating and about having their voices heard. If we could elaborate a little bit more on this topic, that would be great. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Well, so I'm not sure, I did mention different communities in my intro, but I didn't mention that another portfolio of mine was public engagement and how to change public engagement. So I have many thoughts about this, so let me just marshal them a little. When I first started getting involved, you know, I came from an activist tradition and background. That was my my life before I got elected to politics or elected to government. And so I think I understood the world as you just needed to yell louder and bring more people to be heard. And I don't get me wrong, I still think that's an important strategy, but it's kind of like the sledgehammer of tools in a democracy, right? There's many other tools available to you, and the sledgehammer isn't always the best strategy, right? It is if you need to break down a big wall, but if you're performing surgery, you're gonna kill the patient, right? So you need to find more tools. So when I got elected to government, I put a lot of energy into trying to create those tools. We created the mayor once said, we were talking about superpowers and what different people's superpowers were, and he said, your superpower is creating task force, working groups, and advisory committees. But for me, it was a way of getting people's voices into government. So we were a city where 58% of households rent, and on council, only 2 people rented. And of the 2 of us, the other one had been in the same rental for 30 years, which is not the, for me, I moved 12 times in 15 years, right? I mean, I moved so many times that I basically didn't unpack. And that's more of the common experience for renters in Vancouver. So we created the first Renters Advisory Committee in the world. We created the first Women's Advisory Committee in Canada. We created an Indigenous Advisory Committee. And these things were good, and they created a voice for these communities into government, and also met these communities where they were at. So rather than making Indigenous people come to City Hall at 7:30 at a particular time, the city staff went out into those communities. We had this great example in green buildings where we're making these huge changes to the building code for, we decided to do them in smaller increments. So every 3 years we would change something rather than one big change, but we were at the point where we were making the biggest change. And most of we call them small builders, but actually they're normal sized people that build small homes and small apartment buildings in Vancouver. And most of them come from the Punjab in India or China. So these are the community. So the staff said, well, we keep inviting them to meetings at City Hall. Like, we've tried every time of day, we've tried having food, we've tried all these things. I said, well, have you tried going to one of their meetings and talking to them? Oh, well, we don't really know how to do that. And I'm like, well, now you know exactly how they feel when you invite them to City Hall, right? That's exactly the emotion that they're experiencing. And you have a lot of power compared to what they feel like. So there's no way they're going to come to City Hall. But staff went out in Vancouver, where a lot of the Indian community meets is in the temples. They're religious temples, but they're also sort of community centers for this community. And so staff went there. They still talk about it, like 10 years later, about this experience of not just meeting with these people, but really understanding what was important to them and their community. And the meeting got done, the changes got made, they felt like part of it, and it was a really amazing thing. But it's still not the instinct of government, right? It takes a champion in government like one of us to keep pushing these men who are mayors, or men who lead the engineering department, or people who come from backgrounds where they're not often sitting on the floor in a temple eating food with their hands. It's just not their experience. They're not renters, they're not transit users, and that's the challenge of this process.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maria, your experience?
Well, just to let you know, they've done an excellent job in Vancouver. Before we knew each other, I was in Vancouver visiting while I was Vice Mayor in Vienna, to look into the way you have done this, going out to communities and giving them a voice in City Council. I tried to implement it in Vienna and failed, because in Vienna it is unthinkable that people who do not belong to the City Council could speak there. But it's wonderful the way Vancouver goes about it. Now, I would like to add to this just a story from Vienna again. My experience was that when you try to actually, innovate top down, you face controversy. It's entirely different when the same thing actually arises bottom up. So when I did my first pedestrianization project, it was hell. And once it was done, although people appreciated it afterwards, I still did not know, how do I scale up from here? How do I spread it out throughout the city? I mean, I'm never going through this again and again and again anyway. And besides, I don't have a feeling that something has really changed. So approximately, I don't know, a year later, there was a neighborhood where they had so narrow sidewalks, and they had started putting pot plants on the sidewalks to let plants climb up the walls. And this is because it is a highly dense area and they have practically no trees or very little trees, very little green, greening. So that was a way to go about it. And of course, there were complaints because the sidewalks were practically non-existent, and then you have the pots on there. So they had a warrant by the city that they have to throw out the pots and the plants. And so they came and said, help, can you do something? And I said, yes, I can do something. I can eliminate the sidewalks altogether. And we can turn the street into shared space. And then there's no sidewalks, and then there's enough room for everything. And they said, yes, that's a good idea, and started talking to the people living on the street themselves. And suddenly, it was an entirely different world. And after this was done, the next people came from the nearby vicinity and said, we have an idea. We would like to transform the space, 2 parking slots, let's put it this way, into a small community garden. Could you help? And so on the basis of this, we created a small community grant scheme where everybody that has an idea can actually receive a small grant from the city, plus support in terms of a prototype contract for using public space without having to pay. And the only precondition is that it has to be open to everybody for use without paying entrance, without having to consume something. And all of a sudden, yet again, it's spread throughout the entire city. We've had more than 500 such projects in the last 5 years. Wow. And after that, there is no discussion anymore. I mean, of course, if somebody arrives now and says, I want to pedestrianize, they will have to go through discussion and perhaps to some degree of controversy. But yet everything has changed because it's the people themselves that want it. So I think that in the end, it's about temporary uses, like Andrea said before, with tying the fountains on the hydrants
and checking if they work.
So it's about temporary uses and solutions in different places, and then it's about encouraging citizen action and supporting it. And the third thing is it's about learning from each other. I mean, we were privileged in the sense that we got to know each other while we were still active and learn from each other. But if you ask me what I would love to do, I would love to create a network for vice mayors. Yeah. And because there's so many networks for mayors, which is good. But actually we need to connect vice mayors with each other and let them exchange best practices, experiences, cry on each other's shoulder, whatever they need. But it's very important, to have the people that are on the ground exchange with each other. Mm.
Amazing. Well, so when I was elected, the vice mayor of Auckland, a woman serving with a man and working like very big, like she could be sitting here and she would be like another one of the tribe here. She and I talked about this, but the problem is that the vice mayors are so busy, they have no time for this, right? But we could do this. We could create the League of Extraordinary Vice Mayors.
Of extraordinary former vice mayors.
Well, and give
like
support.
Alumni and give support to the ones that are in office.
This could be an amazing thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So pack your suitcases, we're going to Bloomberg.
Well, and so what I do now, I mean, I give strategic advice, but what I teach about is power. And my interest in it was because I saw this challenge over and over again, is that the people with the titles, I mean, they have a certain kind of power, but it is the vice mayors that have power. It is the person with the potted plant. It is the person in the temple who convinces you to go meet with them. They have power too, and a higher level of power literacy is, in my opinion, inevitably leads to more competency, and that, like, the more we understand our power, the more effective we'll be at creating this political adaptation that we need to effectively fight climate change and build housing and all the other challenges we're facing.
Well, I should talk a little bit about Athens and participatory things that happened in Athens. I think it's really, really hard for mayors and people in power as was already mentioned, to accept that initially. Like they're very scared of allowing participatory processes to dictate or to be part of decision making. I think it's really terrifying, and that was the experience with the former mayor, who in the beginning, Mayor Kaminis, he was quite, I remember, because he was quite scared when we started, kind of created the first kind of workshops that were to call people to participate in decision making. And it was really the mayor's office and the people around the mayor trying to protect him also. So the first kind of reaction was, okay, we will have a very limited agenda. We will tell them that we're already, this is like what's happening, and that we can get feedback about what they think. But this was like really, after all the decisions were made, you kind of bring the people to tell you a little bit what their opinion is. And this is the first steps, but these steps kind of can actually bring change, because people, like the people in power, they kind of understand that it's not so terrifying if you leave space if you actually leave space. Because I think what politicians are really terrified of is people screaming at them and telling them what a bad job they're doing, right? So they're very scared that the whole thing is going to implode into just as a weird, I think that's part of the anxiety. And so slowly, the previous mayor became more and more open to these processes. And by the end, we did have programs that actually there was money allocated to groups that would come and give, propose ideas about specific initiatives within changing their neighborhood or their building that had a green character, or it was some kind of art kind of project. They would give, I think it was up to, depending on how big the team that proposed, it was called Polis to Tetragono, which means city squared. Yeah. And so it was a program that ran for 2 years, and it also was a process that it took people from the city some time for learning how to propose things, because also it took a while, and there were discussions with people from the municipality and from different team of architects and urban planners, that they kind of had workshops with people from neighborhoods, kind of explaining what was feasible, what wasn't feasible, kind of taking and co-designing ideas before they were actually submitted. So that was also interesting, because so it's not only capacity building on the politician side, but sometimes you need some capacity building for the people to help them articulate in ways that the municipality can understand what kind of thing can be done, or what kind of thing. So this was a very interesting process, and eventually, I think the biggest, apart from the fact that when we did the resilience strategy, we were part of the methodology that we used was that we had to make sure that the voices of people that usually are not heard in strategies and in city strategies had to be heard. So we figured out that, who are the people that never get a voice. So it was, we particularly went and found and talked to women immigrants, which was one group that we really kind of had to like several meetings and discussions to find out what they felt worked in the city and what didn't work, and what they wanted to kind of see supported within the city of Athens. And those were very interesting. But also we talked with people that were homeless organizations. We went to a particular, I mean, like, how do you, like, what you have, what kind of representation can you get? So there is a particular magazine that is being produced by the homeless people in Athens called Schedia. So we actually talked with the people from Schedia, and they brought to the table people that were that were homeless, that we could also talk with them and discuss about things. And it was kind of interesting because they did come to the municipality, to the big room where the mayor has the meetings, and they actually, all of these different groups, we went to them, but we also kind of brought them in the municipality, and they loved it because they had never been in the municipality, and it was kind of, it was a sense that they were actually participating, the fact that they came in. So that was kind of interesting too. And finally, we did this big kind of project, Likabetus, where we kind of had about almost 2,000 people participate to create, and universities, and like it was a very, very big project about the future of a resilient future for this hill that everybody loves in Athens. And the first things that came out of it was actually had to do with three particular initiatives that dealt with land erosion, which was happening because of the dry heat that we have in Greece because of climate change and the sudden flash floods. There was a lot of land erosion, especially in the hills. We lose a lot of soil. So we had three projects which are right now being implemented. And it's kind of funny because people don't really, unless you kind of follow up, people don't know. So that's one of the problems, that often people don't hear what's happening. So they feel that they participate and then, you know, the floor drops and you really have to continue them. So that's another issue, because when the mayor changes, then all of this gets disrupted. And it's really hard to continue to create this dialogue in a way that is sustainable and people don't feel that, oh, what happened, you know. So what happened with Likabetus for the people in Athens is that there are now three land erosion projects that are being implemented. One of them is on the side of, one of the sides that had the hardest land erosion. We're doing kind of nature-based solutions for keeping the dirt on the, which of course is very important for the trees and everything. The other thing is that there is the road, the asphalt road that goes up and down Likabetus is planned and is going to be removed. We're going to remove all the asphalt and put water permeable materials, which is going to also change the character. So this is also the second thing that's starting to kind of now be discussed and being implemented. The third one has to do with walking paths. So this is just to say that this is one of the first things that came out from the people that we talked to, because they said, if we have another one of these floods that we had in 2016, we're going to have people dying in their underground apartments near Likabetus, because there's so much, which is the center of Athens, and nobody would think that this is actually an issue, but people were terrified of water and of possible flooding, the people that live in the Ipogia underground and around Likabetus. So anyway.
So we have some time for questions, answers from the audience. Are you feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. We're totally
great.
excited.
That's great. Thanks so much for this discussion. I'm sure that if you weren't former yes,
deputy mayors,
yes, maybe it wouldn't be so interesting. So maybe. Is there questions from the audience? Somebody would like to intervene, would like to ask, would like to? Yes, please.
First of all, thank you very much for the discussion. It was a really interesting discussion to see all the women leaders in front of us. But I would like to know, or to ask you, how was the reaction of the citizens towards you, like women's leaders? And how was the cooperation with the board or the mayor or the rest of the board of municipality? That I can suppose the mayors were all men. So how was the relationship? Was, I can imagine, not so easy, or I don't know, just this question.
Thank you very much. Would you like to comment that?
Sure, I can jump in. Yeah, well, so I think Vancouver's political system is quite different than Vienna and Athens. So we have what's called the first past the post electoral system, which means you get elected with the majority if you're either in the minority or the majority. There's no coalitions or things like this. And I was with the majority. I would not have had these opportunities. The mayor and I have been friends for many years, like before I actually was part of the effort to recruit him to run. And so I was very supportive of him, not every day, which he was very aware of. He was very open to hearing when I wasn't, and he had some criticism for me, but generally we were very supportive of each other, a very good team. I think though, and it's not to be critical of him or the other people I worked with, but you know, I grew up, I'm a foster kid, I grew up in a low income community. You know, I'm not the kind of person, I don't have a university degree, I never went to university. I'm not the kind of person you expect to see in government. And so the job was always mine to make those relationships work, right? Like to use their language, to not be I was disruptive for sure, to not offend their culture, if that makes sense, to understand their culture and work well within it, right? But I think to their credit, they were always often, sorry, I won't use the word always, but often very happy and supportive and actually thanked me for exposing them to other communities that they may never have met, right? Or language that they may never have heard, or understanding the way things were impacting people. Because most people in government don't want to hurt people. They just don't know that their actions might be hurting people. So I would say that. I read a book by a woman named Alicia Garza where she talks about power. The book is called The Purpose of Power. And she says that, you know, the common definition of power is the ability to influence the actions of others. I would say I had a lot of that. But she says, and then also to tell the story of this experience. I would say that is less true. Like I had to speak through the voice of the mayor, if that makes sense. And I think that's a common way that communities have to build power over time.
Okay. I will jump in while you're fixing your microphone. What would you just told reminds me of something I said once in an interview in the last months of being vice mayor. I was asked about power and I said power is a paradox. It's the thing you never have when you need it, or what you need it for, right? And you always have it for things that you don't actually need at that moment. But that's another story. I would say I experienced colleagues in city council and in administration as supportive most of the times. And I don't know, you could suspect that perhaps women have to prove more intensely that they know what they're talking about. But once they have actually found that you know what you're talking about, that you have a plan, and that you are respectful also in terms of listening to them. Most of them are technicians in our departments when it has to do with spatial planning, greening, and so on and so forth. So you really have to listen to what they're saying. And you have to take the time, and you have to be patient, but not too patient sometimes. But what the point I'm trying to make is once they've actually realized, yes, she has a plan and she really wants to pull things through, they're extremely supportive. Now, the media are another story and the population is another story. In my case, I think I can't stand for many other people because I was not born Austrian. So I am, in the end, a woman and a migrant, first generation. And this has been quite tough at times. But then I think that misogyny is an issue anyway. And it's not only in Austria or in Greece an issue, it's actually an issue that most probably it's worldwide like this. And I think that it is what we're experiencing or have been experiencing in the past decade was kind of misogyny transforming itself. You know, it kind of disguises. It comes in very different ways and very different manners. So at first glance, one will be very polite most of the times, but you suddenly realize that aggression is much higher and that it comes much quicker and much tougher. And that you have to prove so many things that men are never asked to prove. But what I also always warn is that you are not allowed to end up by, whenever, you know, at the other extreme, whenever you face difficulties, to say it's because I'm a woman, because this is wrong as well. And to always keep in mind that actually politics, and urban politics especially, is becoming a tougher job each and every year. So I have been also experiencing what male colleagues have been facing, which is perhaps a tiny bit less intensive, but it's intensive enough as well. And what I'm warning right now is that if things continue, you know, developing, evolving this way, it will get more and more difficult to find people who are really good, who are willing to go into politics. But, you know, let's hope for the best, and let's hope that these are times where aggression is actually getting worse, because these are not easy times, to be honest. I mean, look at the 1.5 years that we've all spent already with restrictions, and look into disparities in terms of economic disparities getting worse, income disparities getting worse, young people not being able to find a job. I mean, I don't need to tell everybody all the things that we all know. And I think that this makes it so tough to go into politics and to produce things right now, regardless if you're a man or a woman.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's hard times, and we need good people in power now more than we've ever needed them before. Because it's really, the issues are harder and more difficult. For me, the issue of, I think an interesting aspect has to do with the fact that because climate change has not been part of the agenda in Greece, the political agenda in Greece almost at all, until very recently, it was really hard to be heard. So being a woman made it harder, and it was very easy for tons of people to totally dismiss me or whoever else was doing it in my shoes. Very easy to kind of to shut you down and to not be able to talk almost at all about it. Or when you were talking, so it just took a lot of patience and perseverance, and just kind of perseverance, basically. But there was a lot of men that I have met that just, it's very, very easy for them to kind of dismiss and shut you up, which is a very basic level of aggression. So I think what is kind of interesting is that there's a lot of women working in climate. And it's very, very interesting because there's also a lot of support between us. And even in Greece too, and from the previous panel, I mean, I know the people that were in the previous panel, were they all women or was it most women?
All women.
All women. There's really a lot of women that have been involved in climate issues, climate resilience, which is very close to adaptation. I wanted to kind of raise this question initially for you guys. What's the difference between adaptation and resilience? But it doesn't matter because the discussion went in a lot of different ways. But there's a lot of women, especially that deal with adaptation and resilience, climate adaptation and resilience. And In mitigation, there's a lot of women too, but mitigation, you have also a lot of men. And they've been dealing with mitigation for quite a while now. Leaders that had the vision and actually did a lot of things that have to do with mitigation. But adaptation is very much of a women's aspect. And I find that very interesting. And I find it also very hard, empowering and I want to, so this is what I want to juxtapose to Maria's really true fear that we're getting less and less good people that want to be in power because it's so difficult and there's a lot of kind of violence out there. But violence towards the leadership, but also violence to deal with for the leader. The positive thing is that I think that there's a lot of women that are now finding a voice that is stronger, and there's also a lot of women that support women. That is also something that we haven't seen before. Like I feel very much more, every year that goes by, I feel stronger the networks of women that I've worked with and that I want to work with, and that we're finding ourselves again working together stronger every time a little bit. So this is something I think that's a positive note.
Yeah, well, so the flip side, like the funny thing, I didn't think to talk about the public, but when I first got elected, I was 29. I was a woman, and I was with the Green Party. And so the chances of me getting elected were like, not very big. It was a big surprise for everyone, but so they expected very little from me. And so the fact that I could speak in complete sentences, so it was this weird thing where the discrimination actually helped me, like because people's expectations were so low, I just had to be kind of average for them to be like, wow, you're amazing. Like, let's put you in this and that. So I think even in the worst situation, there's some shadow side that allows you the opportunity to push. But I do think those of us that have been there, there's so much, I hesitate to say obligation, but I'd say strong opportunity for us to support and help the women who have yet to come. Because, we're all white passing at least, or white reading, and there's like women from many different backgrounds and many different physical abilities and in many different social circumstances that still are having a lot of trouble. And Vancouver City Council, so we did all this work around gender equity. There's now 8 out of 11 that are women, but they're all blonde. They're all like higher income and that's not, if you walk around Vancouver, you do not see a lot of blonde women, right? They're all sitting in the city council chamber. So you have to sort of, over time, you bring in, you have to keep fighting to make everyone included.
Can we take one more question? Or
Is there from the internet?
no, but I'm not sure that it's not a technical problem.
I was expecting a question from the blonde women in Vancouver who aren't on city council saying, don't you remember me?
Why don't you just speak up?
I'm
for
sorry,
the
no,
internet.
because from the Zoom they cannot hear you if you just speak up.
We can repeat the question.
I was in Barcelona when they did the first, and I think because you talked about this, about such time.
I'd love to jump in on this.
Yes,
Please, yes, please.
By the way, I was also there, but not while they implemented it.
Sorry, Maria, because
Oh, yes,
from
we
the
have to
Zoom they
repeat the
didn't
question.
hear
Yes.
the
Do you want to say the question?
I can try. It was from Angelos Chronis. He commented that he was at Barcelona during the Superblock project was implemented. He was really excited for that, but everybody hated the project tremendously. So.
So the idea was, how do you actually convince people to support something that's actually to their benefit?
But
right?
I have to jump in before you go there, to that, because we have to explain to the people what's a superblock. So a superblock, what Barcelona did, which is brilliant, and which we should do in Athens as well, and which is part of the resilience strategy, but nobody is kind of started really actually thinking of doing it, but we have to do it, is that you take 4 blocks of the city and you pedestrianize the cross that is between them. So you let the cars go around the 4 blocks, but the streets in the middle, and especially the center kind of where they all meet, become a pedestrianized, and also with green and the park in the middle, and you basically gain public space, especially in cities that are very densely built. This is a great way to try to gain a public space.
And by the way, the most brilliant idea of transforming the already built city in its entirety.
Exactly.
Now, I happened to be there as well a couple of weeks earlier, and they had the controversy already, so I experienced exactly what you're talking about. And by the way, they don't have even Barcelona, because, you know, Barcelona, they're one place on earth that invented everything and anything, and especially traffic calming and transforming the city and introducing one of the longest pedestrian zones that there are in Europe and whatnot, have also had tremendous controversy a couple of years ago when they tried to pedestrianize another street. And they did a referendum, because they tend to do these kinds of things regularly, and they lost it. And they could not pedestrianize, which is an interesting thing, because at the same time, I was about to do the referendum in Vienna also for pedestrianizing a street, but we had the good luck to speak to the people from Stockholm before that, who had introduced the congestion charge. And had done it the same way, like they said, they told the people that we're going to introduce the congestion charge, which was also hated, for a year, and then you can experience the difference. And after that, we'll have a referendum, and if you agree with it, it will stay this way, and if you don't agree with it, we're gonna stop, okay? And so they did this, and after a year, they had the referendum, and they won it by approximately, as far as I remember, 60 or 65%. So we learned from the Swedish and did the same thing in Vienna, and we had these 9 months of permanent controversy in the testing phase, and after that, we had the referendum, and we won with 53%, whereas Barcelona did not do it and lost. So what is, in the end, yes, the meaning of this story? Machiavelli, who is not such a bad guy as everybody thinks.
Turns out.
No, it doesn't only turn out. I mean, he's one of the misunderstoodest people in history.
Agree.
That's true.
Once said that when you try to change something, you must expect fierce controversy from anybody fearing disadvantages, and only very lax support from the ones who are sure to benefit from it, which is truth. And it is also actually a paradox of change. And there may be 3 ways to go about it.
Katze, can you say it again?
He said,
okay,
when trying to change something, you must expect fierce controversy from everybody fearing disadvantages.
Yeah.
But only very weak support from the ones who know that they will benefit from it.
Right.
They just don't
It's
care.
not an equally kind of powerful
they're not mobilized,
response.
okay? They will not fight for it. They will just watch you trying not to drown,
Right.
okay, amidst, the open sea, high waves, whereas all the ones that fear disadvantages will be out there screaming, right, and fighting. So I think that there are three ways to go about it. The first one is you have to have a strong will, and if you don't have a strong will, don't go to politics, don't do it, okay? So, and then you have to fight your way through controversy, and you have to say, I'm convinced that this is good for everybody or for the following groups of people, and these are my priorities, and I'm doing it, and this is representative democracy. And once it's done, you can decide if you want to vote for me, yes or no. This is a way to pull things through, but in many cases, it's not enough because many cities have referenda, have to do them, so you may be losing them, and so on and so forth. And the second thing is that if you go about it this way, you have about 10 years of life in this type of politics until you're through, you're done. And it's not what people have done to you or if they want to vote for you or not, it's just that you feel like that was enough for me. And I think that there are more interesting and smart ways to go about it. And we've been talking about it a lot today. So it's about, once again, letting people experience. It's about temporary uses, and it's about bottom-up encouragement. And then in the end, it's about most probably a mixture of all three.
Yeah, I'll take I agree at a meta level. I would say I can't imagine a circumstance that the majority of humans would agree to do something because they were told to do it. So if you came to a restaurant and I'm like, this is what we have for dinner tonight, you make a choice to stay or go to another restaurant, right? If I'm like, here are 4 things you can have for dinner tonight, you'll probably stay and choose one of those things and stay in the restaurant, right? And I think the challenge, like, even if, I think there are ways, and I also agree Machiavelli maybe, I've had to read about him because I'm teaching about power. I had no idea. Like, he also wrote the first book ever written on public engagement, right? On authentic, good public engagement. So yeah, maybe a bit misunderstood. Anyway, to go back to the point, you can get things through, but your political life is very short. So this is bad for a city too, because it means the politics go back and forth. So in the long arc, you're not moving forward either, right? The next guy rips out the bike lanes or takes out the whatever it is you got through. So I would say the strategy that I think is most effective, Mariana Mazzucato just finished this book, Mission Economy, which I think outlines it well, but I'll just give you a brief anecdote from Vancouver. So in climate, the atmosphere is not negotiating with us, right? So you can hold all the public meetings you want about how much emissions we should cut. The atmosphere does not give a shit. Like there's an absolute scientific limit. So the only people you should be talking to about how much emissions should be cut are scientists. That's the only consultation you need to do. The public consultation is about how do we do this, right? So if we know we have to cut by 80%, here is the available menu, going back to the restaurant, of the ways that we can do that. Which ones do you want, right? Which pain do you want to suffer? Because we have to do one of them. And so Mariana lays it out as the mission. So the government's job is to lay the mission out, and then the public participation is not up for debate around what the mission is, it's up for debate about how we're going to achieve the mission. And that's how we did Greenest City. We said, if you can get 10 people, we had an expert panel set these 17 goals in these 10 areas. But then we said, if you can get 10 or more people in a room, we will come and meet with you. In retrospect, maybe we should have made it a few more people because we went to a lot of meetings, 35,000 people met in these small groups. But through that, what we did was not create a plan for them, we created a plan by them. So when we passed the plan, it was not at all controversial. There was no one who came to speak against it. There was a lot of people who wanted to come speak for it. They were so excited about it. But it was their plan, essentially. And I think that's where, and the plan, so there was an election about 6 months after we passed the plan. The party that ran against us, the main one, ran against the Greenest City plan, which was essentially like running against the most active people in the city, and they got their ass kicked, right? So I think this is the more durable strategy, is for governments to be courageous in setting the mission and then figuring out how to engage the public on their turf, like going to where they're at, on how you're going to do it.
Which, by the way, before Lenio can say something, is exactly the approach of the European Commission right now with the 100 climate neutral cities mission. So the idea is that the plan of how to become climate neutral is created in every city by the people and by the entire ecosystem within, each city.
I think that the answer was great, and the answers of the previous friends of mine were perfect. The only thing that I would add, which you interrupted me and I totally forgot, is
Machiavelli was misunderstood.
no, but the only thing that I would add would be. No. Anyway, I think that it's really, really important to get to engage. The only thing I would add is this. That people are increasingly expect it more to happen. So the more the governments and the people in power don't do it, the more reaction they get to their public works and to the things that they decide to do. So I think that the whole kind of social media and the whole, what we're doing today and, everything like that has raised the demand and the expectation that somehow your voice has to be heard. Like on some level, you have to be taken into consideration. At least you have to be informed. And feel like you are part and you understand what's happening, and also that your voice is heard. So I think that this is really a demand that is they better listen to it, the people that are leading, because otherwise they're going to have a lot of trouble.
So I think we can take the rest of the questions outside with a glass of wine, if you all agree, because we have to leave the room and in a few minutes.
Thank you
agree.
for having us.
Thank you very much.
It was a great
Thank you very much.
pleasure to be with
And
Maria.
thanks a lot to the people in Zoom that
Maria
they
and
are
Andrea.
still connected. And we hope that you enjoyed the discussion, even though it's not technically supported to talk from the Zoom, from the audience. We're sorry for that. And Maria, we miss you in Athens, but next time.
I'm really sad I missed this session being live there, but I'm glad to be part of the Zoom audience. Thank you so much for this discussion, and I'm sure that we had in the audience policymakers, urban practitioners, like people have learned from you, heard your experiences, and I think we will see like a lot of inspiration in the next lectures as well in the following days coming from this discussion. Enjoy your glass of wine and looking forward to a next meeting somewhere around the world. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.